At gate B22, Sergeant Maya Carter stood silently, clutching her boarding pass. After 6 months in Afghanistan, she was finally heading home to Chicago. When the airline announced first-class boarding, she was surprised seat 2A wasn't what she paid for, but maybe it was a quiet gesture of thanks. She accepted it without question, too tired to second-guess a rare kindness. Walking down the jet bridge, Maya's rucksack shifted. The flight attendant greeted her politely. She found Tua stowed her gear and eased into the wide seat. The quiet felt surreal after months on noisy transport planes. For a moment, she let herself relax, letting the contrast of peace wash over her. Then came a sharp voice. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat." The man, dressed in a blazer and brimming with entitlement, looked Maya over. "There must be a mistake. This is first class." She calmly showed her ticket to a buyer. The man frowned, clearly unsettled by the sight of her uniform in a premium seat. A flight attendant approached, her professional tone never faltering. "Is there a problem, sir?" The man shook the ticket in his hand. "Yes, this woman is claiming she's in first class. Surely this is some kind of mix-up." The attendant glanced at the pass, then at Maya. "Sergeant Carter is in the correct seat." "Tua." Her voice was still calm, but there was a firmness beneath it. The man flushed, the color rising in his neck. "This is unacceptable." He turned away, muttering something under his breath, and took his seat a few rows back. Maya stared forward, unmoving, her jaw tight. She didn't want to make a scene, but scenes had a way of finding her anyway, and what she did next would stay with that man for the rest of his life. The man's retreating steps faded behind her. Maya remained still, staring at the seat in front of her, steadying her breath. This wasn't new, just sadly familiar. She retrieved her worn military-issued notebook and began writing. The words came easily, not to confront, but to process. She didn't even know his name. That wasn't the point. She described her deployment not in battles, but through human stories. A translator who brought tea when she was sick. A fellow soldier who gave up his call so she could hear her mum on Christmas. It was about loss, trust, and the quiet grief that lingers after combat. When turbulence hit, Maya barely reacted. Others gripped seats, prayed. She reassured a fearful older woman nearby with calm words, unshaken. Across the aisle, the same man read her closely. His face showed something unfamiliar, uncertainty. She returned to her letter, remembering how isolated she felt as the only black woman in her platoon. She didn't write for pity, nor did she glorify struggle. She simply explained what the seat meant. It wasn't a gift. It reflected her journey, the trials she'd endured, and who she'd become. She wrote about Maria, her fierce, funny friend who died saving her. Maria's memory lived in every word. This wasn't just a letter to Richard, it was for Maria, too. Proof Maya kept going, that she kept writing. She wrote, not with grief, but with reverence, about how they had shared MREs and war stories, about the songs they sang during guard shifts, about how Maria had plans to become a nurse once she got back home. Maya had promised her that if she made it back alone, she would live with purpose, not just survive, but speak when others couldn't. This letter wasn't just for the man in seat 5D. It was, in some way, for Maria too. A way of saying, I kept going. I found a seat at the table. I'm still writing. Across the aisle, Richard Blake stirred. He'd been quiet since the turbulence, shifting only slightly, but now his eyes were clearly resting on Maya, not in judgment this time, but in thought. He looked down at his hands, clenched in his lap, then glanced toward the window. Something in his posture had changed. His shoulders weren't as stiff, his jaw less locked. There was no apology, no attempt to speak, just silence, raw and uncertain. Maya continued writing. She spoke now of the moments after deployment, walking into stores where no one looked her in the eye, being questioned more than thanked, being asked, "Are you really in the military?" like it was an audition she hadn't passed. She didn't write these things to make the reader uncomfortable. She wrote them because they were true. She wanted Richard to understand that this wasn't about a seat on an airplane. It was about the constant negotiation of presence, about how some people were allowed to exist without justification, while others had to explain every breath they took. She kept her tone steady. No bitterness, no guilt-tripping, just truths, lined up like quiet stepping stones. She ended the letter not with a challenge, but with a bridge. She wrote, "You don't have to say anything, but if you've ever sat in a seat you thought you earned, ask yourself who you thought didn't." She underlined nothing. Let the sentence stand exactly as it was. As she closed the notebook and tucked it back into her jacket pocket, the cabin, lights dimmed for the cruise portion of the flight. People reclined. A baby cried softly somewhere in the back. Maya folded her hands in her lap and let her eyes resonate to sleep, but to breathe. For the first time since she stepped into the airport, she felt steady. The confrontation was behind her. The turbulence had passed. But more than that, she had spoken without raising her voice. She didn't know if the man would read the letter. She didn't expect him to change overnight. But she believed in the small chance that if a seed was planted, something might shift. Later, when no one was watching, that was the kind of change that lasted. And just before the seatbelt sign blinked off, she glanced sideways and noticed Richard was still looking at her, not directly, but often. His expression wasn't hostile anymore. It wasn't warm either. It was what came in the middle and settled awareness. He didn't know it yet, but something in him had already started to move. The plane landed with the kind of soft thud that made you wonder if the wheels had even touched the ground. As passengers unbuckled and reached for bags, Maya Carter remained still, her eyes on the seat back ahead. She wasn't in a hurry. She rarely was anymore. Patience had become part of her uniform. When the rows began to shuffle forward, she stood, lifted her rucksack from the overhead bin, and stepped into the aisle. Just before turning toward the exit, she paused. She reached into her jacket, pulled out the envelope she had asked the flight attendant for earlier, and walked the few steps to row 5. Maya stood by Richard as he gathered his bag. She handed him an envelope. "You don't have to read it now," she said, "but I hope you will. No judgment, no drama, just an offering." He accepted it with hesitation and a softened tone. The Chicago terminal was crowded, but familiar. Maya stepped into the rhythm of homecoming signs, voices, announcements echoing overhead. She didn't notice the man following her until she heard footsteps quicken behind her. Sergeant Carterweight. She turned. Richard Blake, breath slightly short, stood there holding the envelope in one hand. "I read it," he said. "I couldn't wait." Maya blinked, surprised. "I thought you might toss it." He shook his head. "I didn't expect to see myself in it, but I did." There was a pause. Travelers brushed past them. Maya stayed still. "You didn't have to come after me." Richard looked down, then back at her. "There's something I should have recognized earlier, but it didn't click until I saw your name at the end of the letter." His voice grew quieter. "Carter, Fort Benning, 2012, Charlie Company, 3rd Platoon." Maya narrowed her eyes. "How do you know that?" And then it happened. His expression shifted. A heaviness settled in his voice. "I was your drill sergeant." She stared at him, trying to place the face beneath the years, a younger version, with sharper edges, a voice that barked orders and rarely praised. She felt it then, the memory like a spark behind her ribs. "You were Sergeant First Class Blake," she said slowly. He nodded. For a second, neither of them spoke. The noise of the terminal seemed distant. Maya remembered the grueling physical tests, the way she had been singled out, told she'd never make it, warned that she was dragging the squad down. "You told me I'd break before week 3, she said flatly. "And I tried," he admitted. "I thought I was doing my job, pushing you, making you harder. But I see now that I wasn't training you. I was doubting you." Maya crossed her arms. "Why?" Richard inhaled deeply. "Because I didn't think someone like you had what it took. I judged you before I even saw you run. And when you proved me wrong, I didn't know how to process that, so I buried it. I buried you, in drills and silence." He wasn't defensive, just honest. And there was something more painful in that than if he'd made excuses. She could have said a lot. She could have called out the months of bruises, the quiet tears in the barracks, the way she'd nearly packed her bags twice. But she didn't, because right there, in the middle of an airport filled with strangers, she realized something. She had outgrown the version of her he once tried to define. She didn't need an apology to know she had one. Still, she spoke. "I didn't survive because of you. I survived in spite of you. And maybe that's what hurts more." Richard looked away. "It does." Another pause. Then he added, "But that's not why I followed you today. I came because I needed to tell you something else." He pulled a folded photo from his wallet and handed it to her. "This is my brother Daniel. He served in Kandahar. He died there. 2015. Maya studied the face young bright-eyed, wearing a uniform that matched her own. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Richard nodded. losing him, I stopped seeing people as individuals. I started measuring them against who I lost. And when I saw you in that seat, I didn't see a soldier. I saw someone who made it home when he didn't. It was unfair. And I knew it the moment I looked in your eyes. Maya handed back the photo. Grief can make enemies of everyone, she said, even the ones who don't deserve it. He looked at her for a long time. You deserved better, back then, and today. Then, after a breath, would you be willing to talk more? I run a veteran group in the city. We help soldiers re-enter civilian life, but honestly, we've never had anyone who could speak the way you do. Maya tilted her head. You think people would want to hear from someone like me? I do now, he said. She considered it. The idea wasn't about ego, it was about impact, about giving voice to others who'd felt dismissed. All right, she said, I'll think about it. They parted ways in the terminal with a handshake, not warm, but meaningful. Maya walked toward the escalators, feeling lighter, not because anything had been erased, but because something had shifted, in him, and maybe, in herself. She had once sworn that if she ever saw Sergeant Blake again, she'd make him regret everything. But now, as the moment passed, she realized she didn't want revenge, she wanted recognition, and perhaps, she had just received it, that evening. She sat at her childhood kitchen table, telling her family what had happened. Her younger brother was furious at first. Her mother went quiet. Her father simply said, sometimes life circles back, just to make sure you're still standing. And she was. Later that night, Maya took out her notebook again. On a fresh page, she wrote only one sentence. Not every reckoning looks like justice. Sometimes it looks like understanding. She closed the book and for the first time in a long while, felt peace, not just from where she had been but from where she might be headed. 3 days after the encounter at the airport, Maya Carter stood on the sidewalk outside a modest brick building tucked between a post office and a diner. The sign above the door read Second Mission, Veteran Support Network. It was unassuming, but the kind of place that had weight in its walls. She had agreed to meet Richard here not because she needed anything from him, but because something about their unfinished conversation lingered. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that odd, quiet feeling that only comes when something in life circles back and waits for your response. Inside the support group space, Maya saw mismatched chairs, old flags, and quiet faces. Richard introduced her. She shared her story not to fix anything, but to lighten her silence. She spoke of being unseen, of strength that doesn't shout, and people listened not with applause, but stillness. They sat in silence for a few minutes as people trickled in, men and women, some older, some still in their 20s, all marked in quiet ways by their service. Richard introduced Maya without fanfare. This is Sergeant Maya Carter. She served overseas, and she's got something to share if you're willing to listen. No applause, no expectation, just nods, respectful attention. Maya stood, notebook in hand, but not reading from it. She looked at them and began with something simple. I didn't come here to fix anything, she said. I came because sometimes silence becomes too heavy, and telling the truth, your truth, makes the load easier to carry. She spoke about her first months back, the disorientation of home not quite feeling like home, how war teaches you to read a room before you speak, and how often she had felt unseen in places she should have belonged. I've had people thank me for my service with one hand, she said, and lock their doors with the other. A few heads nodded. No one looked surprised. She told them about Maria, her friend who didn't make it back, and how every story she told now was, in some way, Maria's too. She told them about the flight, about the letter. She didn't mention Richard by name, didn't need to. It's strange, she said, how sometimes the people who once tried to break you become the people who help you rebuild something. She paused. I don't need apologies, I need accountability, and I think those are different things. When she finished, there was no clapping, just stillness, a kind of sacred quiet, like everyone in the room had exhaled at the same time. Richard cleared his throat. Would it be all right if I said something? Maya nodded once. He stood not in command, but in vulnerability. I used to think I was a good leader, that I was just tough on people, because that's what the job required. But I've realized toughness isn't strength if it comes from fear. He looked down, then back at the group. When I saw Maya on that plane, I didn't see a soldier. I saw a challenge to what I thought I knew, and I almost missed the chance to learn something that's been right in front of me for a long time. Someone in the back, a woman with a prosthetic leg, spoke up. Sometimes we survive what they told us we couldn't, and then we still have to prove we belong. After the conversation flowed from there, not scripted, not polite for the sake of comfort, but honest in a way that felt rare. People shared their own experiences of being dismissed, overlooked, misjudged. A young white Marine admitted he never realized how differently his black bunkmates had been treated, until one of them told him. After a year of silence, a Vietnamese-American medic talked about always being asked where he was really from. Even in uniform, it wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about blame. It was about recognition. Afterward, as people drifted out, several stopped to thank Maya. One man offered his daughter's email, said she was studying criminal justice and would benefit from hearing Maya's perspective. Another just gave her a nod, nothing more. But it felt like a full conversation. Outside, as the sun dipped low over the city's skyline, Maya stood with Richard by the curb. He looked tired but lighter. "I won't pretend like I've figured it all out," he said, "but that room felt different tonight. Because of you." She shook her head. "Not just me, because someone listened." He handed her a small card. It was plain, with only a quote printed in the center. "The truth will set you free, but first, it will make you uncomfortable." Maya smiled. "That's fair." They parted with no promises, just the understanding that some bridges weren't built with wood or steel but with memory, remorse, and the decision to stand still and hear each other out. Later that night, Maya lay on her childhood bed, notebook open beside her. She wrote down a single line: "You don't win the battle by yelling the loudest. Sometimes, you win by sitting still and refusing to disappear." She stared at it for a while, then added below, "There's power in being seen, even by the one who once refused to look." The next morning, Maya woke early. Old habits didn't fade easily, even in her childhood home, with the familiar creak of floorboards and the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Her body still moved with the quiet rhythm of formation calls and pre-dawn readiness. She made her way downstairs and found her father seated at the table, reading the newspaper with his glasses pushed down to the edge of his nose. He looked up and smiled. "Sleep okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, better than I expected." They talked about small things at first: the weather, the neighbor's new dog, the back porch needing paint. But eventually, her father folded his paper and said, "Your mother told me you met someone from your past, someone who used to make things hard for you." Maya sipped her coffee. "He didn't recognize me at first. I'm not sure I recognized myself either." Her father didn't press. He never had. But he leaned forward slightly, the way he did when something mattered. "How did it feel, seeing him again?" She thought for a moment. "Not like I thought it would. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted clarity." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes the best thing you can offer someone isn't punishment. It's a chance to do better." Maya looked at him, surprised. "You sound like Mum." He chuckled. "I married well." That afternoon, Maya stood in front of her old high school. The principal had invited her to speak. Word of her work with the veteran group had spread fast. She'd hesitated at first, unsure what to say to a room full of teenagers. But now, standing behind the podium in a crowded gymnasium, she looked out at rows of young faces, curious and restless, and began. She didn't tell them about war, not directly. Instead, she talked about identity, about what it meant to carry someone's assumptions before you even opened your mouth. She talked about silence, about dignity, and about how you don't have to yell to be powerful, you just have to keep showing up. "When I was your age," she said, "I didn't know if I belonged anywhere. I didn't see myself in the stories we were told, but now I've learned this. Your story doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs to be told." Afterward, a young girl approached Hurtle, quiet, wearing a hoodie with the sleeves pulled down over her hands. "I liked what you said," she murmured, "especially the part about showing up." Maya crouched a little to meet her gaze. "It's the hardest part, but it's where all the strength lives." The girl smiled, small and quick, before slipping back into the crowd. That evening, Maya sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across the street. Her mother joined her with 2 glasses of lemonade, handing one over with a knowing look. "You've always had that fire in you," her mother said, "but now ... it's steadier." Maya laughed gently. "I used to think I needed to fight every battle head on. Now I know some are won by staying seated and writing." Her mother squeezed her hand. I hope you know how proud we are of the woman you've become." Maya didn't answer right away. She was watching the wind move through the trees, listening to the rhythm of a place that had once felt too small. "I think," she said quietly, "I'm finally proud of me, too." Later, as the house fell into stillness, Maya opened her notebook once more. On the last page, she wrote, "To the girl who was told she didn't belong in the uniform, to the soldier who wasn't expected to survive training, to the woman who was questioned in first class, you are all the same person, and you are still here." She closed the book, set it on the nightstand, and turned out the light. Outside, the night was quiet. But inside, something had shifted for good. She wasn't just coming home, she was becoming whole.